You know that really specific kind of exhaustion you feel right after a massive
Oh,
crisis?
yeah, absolutely.
Like you've been holding your breath for months or, maybe even years, just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then finally you get the news you wanted.
Right, the exhale moment.
Exactly, the exhale, the lawsuit is dropped, or the test comes back negative, or, in the case of the markets this week, the Supreme Court rules in your favor.
It's totally visceral. You can literally feel the tension leaving your body.
Right, you sit up, your heart rate slows down, and you think, okay, it's over, I'm safe. But then you walk over to the window, you pull back the curtains to look outside, and you realize the house is actually on fire.
That is a terrifying image. But
Mm.
um, looking at the intelligence stack we have today, it is unfortunately dead accurate. That is exactly the vibe of this deep dive.
We are analyzing a stack based on Manal Mehta's market intelligence, and the central thesis we're working with today is what they call the illusion of relief.
Yeah, we are looking at a world where the headline basically screams problem solved, but the data, the forensic accounting, the legislative fine print, they all say no problem mutated.
And it is a incredibly dense stack today. We've got forensic financial analysis on the private credit markets. We have a political pivot that fundamentally changes the trade landscape.
And we have some hard science too. Biotech breakthroughs that honestly sound like science fiction, but the source material shows they are investable realities right now.
So our mission today is pretty simple. We are going to completely ruin that sense of relief for you. We're going to look past those immediate headlines to see the structural shifts underneath.
From the great rebundling of media to, the actual molecular reprogramming of cancer cells, let's get right into the fire.
Let's do it. So starting with this idea of macroeconomic whiplash. The headline that dominated literally every news cycle this week was the Supreme Court striking down the emergency tariffs.
Right, the 6-3 decision.
It's exactly 6-3. And if you were looking at the tickers for, say, Etsy or Amazon, really any major import-heavy stock, it was just green arrows everywhere. The narrative was that the trade war is over.
Yeah, that was the market's knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
Wall Street calls it de-risking. Investors looked at that court ruling and just assumed the friction was gone, that the problem had vanished.
But the source material flags this as a trap, right? A classic head fake.
A massive head fake.
Yeah.
Because the administration didn't just pack up and go home. They didn't look at the ruling and say, oh, well, I guess we'll just try free trade now.
Right, because the Supreme Court ruling was actually very specific.
Extremely specific. It wasn't a ruling on the concept of tariffs at all. It was a ruling on the specific legal authority that the former administration used to implement them.
Which was the IEEPA.
Yeah, exactly, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And IEEPA is a tool meant for genuine national security emergencies.
Like freezing terrorist assets.
Right, or sanctioning rogue states like North Korea. It was never intended to be used as a blanket economic tool to tax consumer goods like toasters and sneakers.
So the court basically said, you used the wrong tool. You can't use emergency war powers for broad economic policy.
That's exactly what they said. But the administration just reached right back into the toolbox and grabbed a different hammer. They pivoted almost immediately to Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act.
And I'm guessing Section 122 is a lot harder to challenge in court.
Oh, much harder. It's this very specific, kind of dusty piece of legislation that allows the president to impose tariffs specifically to manage fundamental balance of payment surpluses.
Meaning if we buy way more from the rest of the world than we sell to them, the president can slap a tariff on imports to balance the books.
You got it. So the legal justification shifted entirely from emergency security to trade deficit management. But the actual result, a reimposed 10% global tariff.
Wow. So legal paperwork changed, the method changed, but the actual economic reality, the friction on global trade, that remained exactly the same.
And that is the trap. If you bought that relief rally, you bought into a narrative that was technically legally true because the old tariffs were struck down, but it was strategically false.
Because the intent of the economic statecraft hasn't shifted one bit. Protectionism is just structural now. It's the new baseline.
Exactly. It's not a quirk of one president anymore. It is the baked-in reality of the American economy.
And to add insult to injury here, the source talks about this refund quagmire. I think this is where the illusion of relief really hits corporate balance sheets hard.
This is a mess.
Because logically, if the Supreme Court says those first tariffs were illegal, the government should have to give that money back to the companies that made it. And we are talking about over $130 billion in collected duties.
Right. Corporate America is looking at that $130 billion as a massive potential windfall. They've probably already mentally booked that cash. Send me my check.
But Justice Kavanaugh dropped a very specific word in his opinion about the refund process. He literally called it a mess.
And in Supreme Court legalese, mess usually translates to do not hold your breath.
Yeah, good luck getting a check before the next decade.
Seriously. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is already signaling this scorched earth legal defense. The government is going to heavily rely on the pass-through defense.
Which means what, exactly, for the listener who isn't a trade lawyer?
It basically means the government says, okay, Target, Walmart, Amazon, sure, you paid the tariff at the port, but then you turned around and raised the prices on the toasters and the T-shirts. You pass that cost directly to the consumer.
Oh, wow. So if the government refunds the company is effectively getting paid twice.
Exactly. The government's argument is you already got the money back from your customers, so you don't get it from us too.
That is devious, because that puts the burden of proof entirely on the corporations.
It is a forensic nightmare for these companies.
Yeah.
They would have to open their books for every single SKU, every transaction, and somehow prove they ate the margin hit instead of passing it on.
Which means separating normal inflationary price hikes from tariff-related price hikes. That seems basically impossible.
It is. We are talking about 12 to 24 months of intense litigation, audits, and operational chaos, not relief.
So the key takeaway on this whole tariff relief narrative is that there is absolutely no quick liquidity injection coming. If you're an importer banking on a government check to save your quarter, you are in serious trouble.
Precisely. That cash is completely stuck in legal limbo. And, while we're on the topic of retailers and trade loopholes, we really have to look at the de minimis loophole.
Right. This is the magic trick that let companies like Shein and Temu basically take over global e-commerce.
It is. The de minimis rule states that if a package is shipped directly from overseas to a consumer and the value is under $800, it enters the U.S. duty-free. No tariffs, no rigorous customs checks.
And that was originally designed for what? Tourists sending home souvenirs.
Exactly. It was for small, personal shipments. It was never meant for massive corporate e-commerce giants shipping millions of individual packages every single day to avoid taxes.
Now, I would have assumed that with the broader tariff regime being struck down, this de minimis loophole would just remain wide open.
That's the illusion again. The source material notes that the White House issued a highly specific executive order to keep that exact door nailed shut. And they cited a national emergency to do it.
So even though the big Supreme Court case was lost by the government, that specific channel that the Chinese e-commerce giants rely on is still blocked.
Right. The cheap flow of goods through that loophole remains blocked. The friction is permanent.
Permanent friction really does seem to be the theme of this whole intelligence stack. Which actually brings us to another massive structural shift, but this time it's happening inside the boardroom. The source calls it the great unwinding of ESG.
And this is fascinating because we've been hearing anecdotal chatter about the death of woke capitalism for a while. But the data in this report is incredibly concrete. We are seeing a massive, sharp reversion to the mean regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates.
Yeah, the data is staggering. The report notes that board appointments for women and minorities in the S&P 500 have dropped all the way back to pre-2016 levels.
Think about that timeline. Corporate America spent roughly 5 years climbing this hill. They peaked around 2021. And in just 2 or 3 years, they've slid all the way back down to where they started.
That is a wildly rapid deceleration. What is actually driving this? Is it just cultural fatigue?
It's really a total collapse in the priority stack, and it's driven primarily by 2 things: legal fear and capital allocation.
Starting with the legal fear, we saw those court rulings in California and the striking down of the NASDAQ diversity rules.
Right. Those legal defeats gave companies the air cover they needed to just stop trying.
Like, they can throw their hands up and say, hey, we'd love to hit these diversity targets, but the courts are saying we literally can't force it.
Exactly. It gave the boardrooms an out. And then the money followed. Major players, we're talking BlackRock, Fidelity, Goldman Sachs, the absolute titans of capital, they are actively diluting or entirely dropping their diversity proxy voting requirements.
This feels like a complete 180. Because just a few years ago, if you were a startup and you didn't have a very thorough DEI slide in your pitch deck, you couldn't even get a meeting. It was seen as essential for your ESG score.
It used to be seen as a cost of capital. If you had good DEI, your cost of capital was lower. Now the framing has completely flipped. It's viewed as a pure legal risk.
Because of the threat of anti-DEI shareholder proposals and reverse discrimination lawsuits.
Exactly. The risk profile inverted. So
Mhm.
if you're a trader looking at this data purely through the lens of capital efficiency, what do you actually do with this information?
The source material suggests something called the capital capitulation trade.
Right. The strategy is to identify the companies that heavily overinvested these non-core ESG mandates. Maybe heavy industrials or energy companies that spend millions trying to look incredibly green or progressive just to appease firms like BlackRock.
And you bet on them ruthlessly cutting those costs.
Yes. The theory is that all that capital gets reallocated straight to the bottom line. It's a play on efficiency over ideology. You find the companies that were just playing the game, and you watch what happens to their margins when they decide to stop playing.
But there is a massive nuance here that the report highlights, and I think this is critical for you listening. They call it the Wasserman effect, because even though corporate DEI programs are retreating, the market's tolerance for personal moral failure is still basically zero.
This is the real paradox of the boardroom right now. Systemic, organized diversity programs are out, but personal reputational morality is under a microscope more than ever. And Casey Wasserman is the ultimate case study here.
He's a huge Hollywood power broker, chair of the LA 2028 Olympics, and his ties to Jeffrey Epstein, which date back to the early 2000s, recently resurfaced.
Right. And you might think, well, that was over 20 years ago.
But the market reaction didn't care about the timeline. When that news hit, the fallout was immediate. Massive client defections. Chappell Roan left, others followed suit, and he was effectively forced to put his talent agency up for sale. So the market is essentially saying, we don't care about your corporate diversity quotas anymore, but if you have a reputational skeleton in your closet, we will financially eviscerate you.
It highlights reputational risk as this incredibly volatile, totally unquantifiable liability for investors. In an era where social media can weaponize a past association in a matter of hours, key man risk isn't just about the CEO having a health issue, it's about the CEO having a moral scandal.
It creates this incredibly high-wire environment for leadership. You have to be absolutely ruthless on cutting corporate ideological costs, but you have to be totally saintly in your private life.
Yeah, it's a tightrope. And speaking of volatility and shifting landscapes, that extends perfectly into the media sector. We need to talk about the cable cartel.
I genuinely love this segment of the stack because it validates every single person who stubbornly refused to cut the cord. For 10 years, the prevailing narrative was, cable is dead, streaming is the future, linear TV is a dinosaur.
And according to this intelligence, the death of cable is officially dead. The source calls it the Great Rebundling. And the massive winners here are the companies that basically everyone loved to hate. Charter Communications and Comcast.
How did they actually pull this off? They were bleeding millions of subscribers for years. Everyone was canceling cable.
They pulled it off because they realized they still held the ultimate trump card. They own the pipes.
The broadband infrastructure?
Exactly. You need broadband to watch Netflix. You need high-speed internet to stream Disney+. Charter and Comcast own the physical gateway that delivers that data to your house.
So they leveraged their monopoly on internet access to force the big streaming companies to the negotiating table.
It was a total masterclass in leverage.
Yeah.
Charter basically went to Disney and said, look, we know you need our internet customers to survive. If you don't let us bundle Disney+, Hulu, and ESPN+ into our standard cable packages at no extra cost to the consumer, we will just drop your linear channels entirely. We will black you out.
And Disney blinked.
They had no choice. They desperately need the distribution and the eyeballs. So now you look at the data, and Charter just posted its first net video subscriber gain since 2020.
Which is wild. And it's working because the consumer math finally shifted back in cable's favor. If I'm paying for Charter internet, and for just a few dollars more they throw in traditional cable TV, plus Disney+, plus Hulu,
the bundle suddenly makes total economic sense again. It actually solves the subscription fatigue problem. Consumers are sick of managing 12 different logins and paying 12 different credit card charges every month.
So cable companies are taking the exact services that were supposed to kill them and turning them into value adds for their high-margin internet pipes. That is brilliant.
They are essentially becoming the new aggregators. They turned the fragmentation of the streaming market into their biggest asset.
So the streaming platforms, Disney, Paramount, Warner Brothers, they are basically just becoming channels again. They're just tiles on someone else's menu screen.
Right, they've been reduced to content farms. The power has decisively shifted back to the distributor.
So what's the trade implication here?
The source explicitly says you want to be long the legacy distributors, the aggregators, like Charter and Comcast. And you want to be short the mid-tier streamers who lack the leverage to resist being bundled at a steep wholesale discount.
Speaking of leverage and lock-in, let's look at the absolute ultimate form of it, moving into the tech and defense space, Palantir.
Yeah, this is probably the most sobering part in this stack for me. Palantir just secured a £240.6 million contract with the UK Ministry of Defence.
And the really crucial detail here is that this was awarded without any competitive bidding.
Zero competition.
How does a company secure a £250 million government defense contract with no competing bids? Usually, government procurement is just this endless nightmare of red tape and vendor competition.
They did it by making themselves completely impossible to remove. The UK Ministry of Defence actually admitted on the public record that their entire data architecture is now so fundamentally built on Palantir's platform that switching to a competitor would be prohibitively costly.
It would literally break their military logistics to try and rip it out.
Exactly. This validates the land and expand business model on a sovereign level. Extreme vendor lock-in. It's not just that it's annoying to switch software, like moving from Apple to Android. It's that Palantir has become the sovereign operating system for a nation's defense apparatus.
That really redefines sovereignty, doesn't it? If a private American tech company physically holds the keys to the data logic of an allied nation, how they organize troops, target weapons, manage supply lines, who is actually holding the power?
It's a huge geopolitical question. But purely from an investor's perspective, this is the ultimate unbreakable moat.
Because the revenue is infinitely sticky. The client literally cannot leave no matter what you charge them.
Right. It completely validates Palantir's premium valuation. You are paying a premium for a company whose customers are, for all intents and purposes, captive.
Captive is definitely the right word there. It's chilling when you apply it to national defense.
It really is.
All right, let's pivot to the forensic finance section of the report, because we are seeing some serious distress signals flashing in areas of the market that were supposed to be the safe havens, starting with the cracks in private credit.
Right, private credit. This has been the absolute golden child of Wall Street for the last 3 or 4 years. Everyone wanted exposure to it.
And now we're seeing the foundation crack. The report highlights Blue Owl Capital, which is a massive titan in the private credit space. They recently had to halt redemptions in their retail-focused fund, OBDC2.
And just to translate that for the listener, halting redemptions basically means the fund tells its investors, you cannot have your money back right now.
Which is a terrifying thing to hear if your life savings are in there.
It's the Hotel California scenario. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. The core issue here is a fundamental liquidity mismatch.
Because retail investors poured billions into these funds, thinking they were getting a safe, steady 10% yield, and assuming they could cash out whenever they wanted.
But the fund takes that retail cash and lends it directly to private, mid-sized companies. Those loans are highly illiquid. You cannot just sell a customized loan to a private software company overnight to generate cash for retail redemptions.
So the investors want daily liquidity, but the assets themselves are locked up for years. And this is where the vultures are starting to circle, right?
Exactly. A major hedge fund called Saba Capital is stepping in and launching a tender offer.
Explain how a tender offer works in this specific distressed context.
So Saba Capital is bypassing the fund managers and going directly to the trapped retail investors. They're saying, hey, I know Blue Owl is telling you your share is mathematically worth $10, but you can't actually get that $10 because the exit door is locked. I will give you $7 in cold hard cash right now. Take it or leave it.
Wow. So they are attempting to buy up these distressed assets at a massive 20 to 35% discount to the net asset value.
And a lot of retail investors will take that deal because they are panicked and they need the liquidity. But the broader market signal here is massive. This tender offer implies that the stated value, the NAV, that these private credit funds are reporting on their balance sheets is essentially fake.
The open market is loudly saying the real clearing price of these assets is 30% lower than what's on the books.
It is a giant red flag for the entire private credit industry. If a titan like Blue Owl is facing this kind of pressure, you have to ask, who else is cracking behind closed doors? If retail panic sets in, this space could get very ugly very fast.
So while the credit markets are showing these structural cracks, the actual physical skies above us are witnessing a totally different kind of corporate war. Let's talk about the airline battle. Virgin Atlantic versus British Airways.
This is such a classic corporate brawl, and it's a perfect case study in the danger of unforced errors.
Yeah.
British Airways essentially shot themselves in the foot. They devalued their long-standing loyalty program by switching to a purely revenue-based model.
Meaning, as a flyer, I no longer get points based on the actual miles I fly. I only get points based on how much money I spend on the ticket.
Exactly. And that shift deeply alienated a very specific, very lucrative demographic. The travel hackers, the independent consultants, the frequent flyers who hunt for deals but are constantly in the air.
These are high-volume customers. They might be flying economy, but they are flying 50 or 60 times a year. And BA basically looked at them and said, your loyalty isn't as valuable to us anymore.
Right. And Virgin Atlantic saw that anger. They pounced on it absolutely ruthlessly. They launched a massive status match campaign.
They just offered to steal them. They said, show us your BA Gold card, and we will instantly hand you a Virgin Gold card. No questions asked.
It is a direct, aggressive seizure of high-margin market share. Because in the airline business, the economics are really fragile. The front of the plane and the elite status holders who buy the upgrades and the lounge access, they heavily subsidize the cheap seats in the back of the plane.
So if BA loses 10 or 20,000 of these gold status members to Virgin, their operating margins could genuinely collapse.
That's the analysis. So the trade implication outlined in the stack is to go long Delta, because Delta owns 49% of Virgin Atlantic and stands to benefit, and go short IAG, which is the parent company of British Airways. It's a pure bet on customer churn and margin compression.
Speaking of margin compression, there's one last financial signal in this section before we move into the science stuff, and this one legitimately made my jaw drop. The current price of a lawyer.
Oh, the legal inflation data. It's wild. Top partners at the absolute elite law firms, places like Wachtell, Cravath, Paul Weiss, they are now billing up to $3,400 an hour.
$3,400 for 1 hour of work. That is nearly $1 every single second. How is that economically sustainable for any company?
It's happening because corporate America is currently operating in a permanent crisis economy. Just look at everything we've already discussed today.
Right. Tariff litigation over that $130 billion. You need the best lawyers.
Defending against anti-DEI shareholder lawsuits. Best lawyers. Handling the reputational fallout from an Epstein connection. Best lawyers.
When you are in a bet the company crisis, you become totally price inelastic. It's like needing heart surgery. You do not look for a discount code when your life is on the line.
Exactly. The report points out a fascinating divergence here. Routine legal work, like basic contract review or standard filings, that is all rapidly going to AI and legal tech. The cost of that work is trending towards zero.
But the high stakes, bet the company crisis management.
That premium is going to infinity. The bespoke human strategic counsel is becoming the ultimate luxury good in the corporate world.
It is definitely a good time to be a crisis manager, that's for sure.
It pays very well right now.
Okay, let's wash the taste of $3,000 lawyers out of our mouths and head into the lab. The biotech frontier section of this report is honestly, genuinely hopeful. It's a nice change of pace.
It really is the most exciting part of the stack today. We are tracking a fundamental, ground-up shift in how medical science treats cancer. The analogy the source uses is that we are moving away from blunt force trauma, like traditional chemo, and moving toward molecular sniping.
Let's start with targeting the undruggable, specifically the RAS gene mutations.
Right. RAS is a gene that, when it mutates, acts as a primary driver for about 30% of all human cancers. We're talking major killers here: pancreatic, lung, colorectal cancer.
But for decades, the scientific community literally labeled RAS as undruggable. Why was it so impossible to hit?
The best way to visualize it is to think of the RAS protein like a perfectly smooth billiard ball. There are no pockets, no deep grooves, no little molecular hooks for a traditional drug molecule to latch onto. And if a drug can't physically bind to the protein, it can't shut it off.
So it was just this smooth, slippery target driving cancer growth. But a company called Revolution Medicines, ticker RVMD, they apparently figured out how to crack it.
They did it by completely changing the target state. For years, everyone was trying to build a drug that would bind to the RAS protein in its inactive state, the off switch. Revolution Medicines designed a drug called RMC-6236 that targets the active state, the on switch.
So it attacks the protein while it's actively driving the cancer.
Exactly. It basically acts like a piece of molecular chewing gum that gets jammed into the gears while the protein is working. It creates this complex that flags the mutated protein, signaling the body's own immune system to come in and destroy it.
And the really massive implication here is that because it targets that active state, it doesn't just work on one specific RAS mutation. It works across multiple different mutations. It's a pan-RAS inhibitor.
It's essentially a master key for a whole class of cancers that we used to think were untouchable.
That alone is incredible. But the report goes deeper. It highlights this theoretical synergy between the RAS inhibitor and something called tRNA therapies. The source calls it the codonome.
This gets into some really deep biology, but the logic is fascinating. So stick with me here. Imagine a factory that is churning out defective, dangerous widgets. In this case, the widgets are cancer proteins.
Okay, factory making bad widgets.
The RAS inhibitor we just talked about. That is basically like standing at the end of the assembly line and breaking the widgets as soon as they come off the belt. You're destroying the final product.
Got it. So what does the tRNA therapy do?
tRNA therapy attacks the factory supply chain.
Like intercepting the delivery trucks before they get to the factory?
Precisely. Transfer RNA, or tRNA, is the machinery that physically brings the amino acids to the ribosome to build the protein. It's the truck delivering the steel to the factory. Companies like Ionis and Alnylam are developing therapies that block those specific tRNAs.
So they're literally stopping the cancer proteins from ever being built in the first place.
Yes, you're cutting the power cord to the factory rather than just breaking the widgets. Now, here is where the synergy comes in.
What happens if you combine them?
You get a double tap, you stop the production of new proteins with a tRNA blocker, and you neutralize any existing active proteins with the RAS inhibitor.
Why is hitting it from both sides so crucial?
Because the single biggest hurdle in oncology is resistance. Cancer is incredibly adaptive. If you use one drug, the cancer eventually figures out a workaround and mutates again to survive. But the hypothesis here is that if you hit it with this combined synergy, it has nowhere left to go. You corner the disease completely.
That is profound. And the source points out a similar systemic pivot happening in Alzheimer's research as well, moving away from the traditional targets.
Yes. For literally 20 years, the entire pharmaceutical industry has spent billions of dollars trying to clear amyloid plaques out of the brain to cure Alzheimer's.
And those plaque-clearing drugs just haven't delivered the kind of results people hoped for.
Right. So the scientific focus is rapidly shifting away from plaques and toward neuroinflammation. The new theory is that the brain is essentially on fire.
Meaning the plaques might actually just be a symptom or a byproduct, and the real damage is being caused by the brain's own immune system overreacting.
Exactly. And the specific target they're looking at now is a regulator called KAT7. KKT7 drives the inflammation response in the microglia, which are the immune cells inside the brain.
And the data on this is already showing promise.
Very much so. In mouse models, inhibiting KAT7 successfully reduced the brain inflammation and, crucially, it actually improved cognitive function. It suggests that if you can change the immune environment of the brain, you might actually be able to treat the underlying disease process.
But here is the connection in the report that absolutely blew my mind. It suggests that solving this Alzheimer's mechanism might accidentally unlock a treatment for brain cancer, specifically lymphoma.
Because it all comes back to manipulating that immune environment. Brain tumors, like lymphoma, are incredibly smart. They manipulate the brain's immune system to protect themselves. They intentionally create a cold immune environment, basically throwing up a cloak so the body's natural defenders can't see the tumor.
So if you use a KAT7 inhibitor to fix the immune system to treat Alzheimer's,
You might inadvertently strip away the defensive shield that protects the lymphoma. It's an incredible 2-for-1. You cool down the inflammation for the dementia, and you strip the armor off the cancer.
that right there is the true beauty of deep biology. These systems are all intrinsically connected. You pull on a thread trying to cure Alzheimer's, and you end up unraveling a defense mechanism for brain cancer. It's not about treating isolated organs anymore. It's about treating the fundamental cellular mechanisms.
Exactly. It's molecular reprogramming.
All right, let's zoom out from the microscopic level and look at the future watch section. These are deep tech innovations that the report flags as being maybe a decade out, but they are already starting to shape long-term investment models today, starting with DARPA and thermodynamic computing.
This concept is wild. DARPA just awarded a $45 million grant to a project involving MIT and Stanford. They are trying to build completely non-silicon processors.
Because the fundamental bottleneck with current chips, especially the massive GPUs made by NVIDIA that power AI, is heat, right?
Heat is the ultimate enemy of computation. These chips get incredibly hot, and we spend massive amounts of electricity and water just trying to keep them cool enough to function. Data centers are basically just giant, hyper-expensive air conditioners that happen to have some computers inside them.
So how does a thermodynamic computer fix that?
It totally flips the script. Instead of fighting the heat and the thermal noise, thermodynamic computing uses those thermal fluctuations as an active part of the calculation process. It relies on non-equilibrium physics.
So it's harnessing the chaos instead of trying to cool it down.
Exactly. It's somewhat similar to the concept of Maxwell's demon in physics. The promise here, the reason DARPA is pouring money into this, is that it could yield a 1,000x improvement in energy efficiency over current silicon chips.
1,000 times more efficient, that is hard to even conceptualize.
Right. And while this tech is easily 10 years away from commercial viability, the report frames it as a long-term existential threat to the current GPU paradigm. If thermodynamic computing works, the massive, power-hungry data centers of today are going to look like obsolete dinosaurs.
It could totally reset the hardware hierarchy. Another future tech flagged in the stack, but one that feels a bit closer to immediate deployment, is direct air capture using MOFs.
MOFs, metal organic frameworks. This is crucial for the climate sector. Think of an MOF as a highly engineered molecular sponge that has an almost impossibly large internal surface area.
The report says a chunk of MOF the size of a sugar cube has the internal surface area of an entire football field.
It's hard to wrap your head around, but yes. And scientists have figured out how to tune these molecular sponges to specifically trap carbon dioxide molecules right out of the ambient air.
Direct air capture has always been criticized as being way too expensive and energy intensive to actually scale up, though?
And that has historically been true. But the breakthrough with MOFs is that their extreme efficiency is finally driving the cost curve down. It's moving the technology from the realm of an expensive science experiment into a genuinely economically viable industrial process.
So carbon capture is transitioning into an actual infrastructure class.
Exactly. Just like we have municipal sewage treatment plants or industrial trash collection, the future looks like massive MOF plants essentially scrubbing the sky for heavy emitters.
Yeah.
It just becomes a standard, regulated utility of industrial civilization.
That's a huge conceptual shift for the green economy. Finally, we need to cover the final segment of the stack, the digital casino and this massive social media liability case.
Yeah, there is a trial happening right now in Los Angeles that legitimately has the potential to break the modern internet. The plaintiffs are suing Meta, specifically over Instagram, and Google over YouTube.
And the core argument they're making is really novel. They aren't just saying these platforms host bad content. They are arguing that the platforms themselves are legally defective products.
That distinction is everything. Usually tech companies just hide behind Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which basically says, hey, we are just the platform. We aren't legally responsible for what third-party users post on our site.
But this lawsuit is attempting an end run around Section 230 by attacking the actual software design, the product architecture itself.
Right. They are targeting features like the infinite scroll or the intermittent variable rewards, when you pull down on your screen to refresh the feed and you don't know what you're going to get. It mimics the psychological mechanics of a slot machine.
And the predictive algorithms that feed you highly engaging, often enraging content before you even consciously know you want it.
The plaintiffs are arguing that these specific design features constitute engineered addiction, that the companies intentionally built a digital casino aimed at minors.
So legally, they're trying to make it analogous to a tobacco company intentionally adding addictive chemicals to cigarettes to keep people hooked. It's a product liability argument, not a free speech argument.
Precisely. And the stakes here are astronomical. If the tech companies lose this case, it forces a fundamental redesign of how social media operates. It moves the conversation way past content moderation and straight into attacking the core product design.
Because if a judge rules that infinite scroll is a legally defective, dangerous product feature, they have to turn it off. And if you turn off infinite scroll or you disable the algorithmic feed, you break the entire engagement model.
And if you break the engagement model, you can't hold the user's attention, which means you can't serve them the ads. It's a multi-trillion-dollar risk to their business model. It signals a massive regulatory shift from the old Silicon Valley mantra of move fast and break things to a new era of prove it is safe before you are legally allowed to ship it.
Wow. Safety by design as the new barrier to entry. So, looking back at this entire massive intelligence stack, from the Supreme Court tariff trap to the cable rebundling to the digital casino lawsuit, what is the overarching through line for you?
I keep coming back to the title of the stack, Whiplash, the illusion of relief.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first order headline signal in almost every one of these stories is dead wrong.
Right. Tariffs get struck down. No, the trade war is actually intensifying under a new legal code.
Cable TV is finally dead. No, it's actually eating the streaming platforms alive.
But corporate ESG and DEI are the permanent future. No, they've suddenly become a massive legal and financial liability.
And social media is just a neutral town square. No, the court might rule it's a legally defective casino.
The lesson here for anyone navigating these markets is that you can never, ever trust the headline. The actual reality is always buried in the mechanical details. It's in Section 122 of the Trade Code, it's in the KT7 brain regulators, it's in the broadband infrastructure leverage.
And we can't forget the human cost in all of this. We talked a lot about corporate refunds and shareholder lawsuits, but the report explicitly mentions the human element, like the astronauts currently stranded on the International Space Station because Boeing suffered from a Type A safety culture failure with the Starliner program.
Right. A massive corporation prioritizing schedule and financial metrics over fundamental engineering safety.
When organizations mistake the illusion of relief or the illusion of safety for actual rigorous safety, the systems break down and real people get hurt.
It's a sobering reminder. So, to wrap this up, the source material always prompts us with a second-order oracle question, a final provocative thought to chew on. Looking at everything we've unpacked today, what is the one thread you just can't shake?
For me, it has to be the Palantir sovereignty question we discussed. We are rapidly moving into a world where private, for-profit tech companies literally own the foundational operating systems of human civilization.
Palantir owns the defense architecture. SpaceX essentially owns the infrastructure of low Earth orbit. Microsoft and OpenAI own the cognitive backbone of artificial intelligence.
Exactly. And the question is, if the operating system crashes, or if the private CEO simply changes his mind about who gets access, what happens, the nation-state is increasingly looking like just another enterprise user with a revocable software license.
So who actually holds the admin keys to the kingdom? Is it the elected president or is it the unelected CEO?
And when you combine that lack of control with the incoming regulatory backlash over safety by design, like we are seeing, with the outrage over AI nudify apps and deepfakes, it creates an incredibly volatile friction point between sovereign governments and private tech monopolies.
That is definitely a thought that is going to keep me up tonight.
Yeah, it's a lot heavier than the illusion of relief, that's for sure.
I suppose so. Well, that is it for this deep dive into the market intelligence. The main takeaway today: keep looking past the headlines and don't get too comfortable when the market tells you to exhale.
Stay curious and read the fine print.